book discussion, I Married a Communist by Philip Roth. This is a book about the psyche of America from maybe like World War II until very recently. Not exactly today, the book was written at the end of the 20th century. But I think we can draw an arch here. We can draw the arch between the beginnings of an America that is still living in its foundation psyche, the psyche of its founders, which is based on, let's say, organic, natural law, and then the transition into ideology and the landing, the hard landing onto an armageddon or a potpourri of postmodern nonsense that I think Philip Roth correctly foresaw, and that's exactly where we live today. The story is, it's a novel, so this is not some sort of nonfiction description of the psyche of America or anything like that. Roth is a novelist. He actually did a trilogy, and this is the second book in a trilogy. I've chosen this book because I think it's sort of the core, in my opinion, the core. I mean, the third book is more contemporary, deals with things like racism and false accusations and anticipates wokeism. This book is less than I mean, it's a bit more embedded in the ideology of the post-war times of America. But again, we can draw this arch beginning with, let's say, a more pure understanding of the world that America was embedded in, particularly before World War II. And then with the rise of fascism and communism in Europe, America couldn't stay away from it, even though they tried, and was infiltrated with ideologies, which led to McCarthyism and the sort of obsession about ideology, whether it's against communism or not, is almost a secondary topic, at least in the book. It's much more about the general idea of ideology that is being depicted in the book. And then there's I would call it the hard landing in the book, and I think it's a good analogy to where the country was at the turn of the century and where it actually ended up being in today's times, which is, again, I call it the postmodern Armageddon, which is sort of believe in nothing, leads you to justify anything, leads you to hijack even formally sacred concepts such as justice, fairness, economic equality, political equality. All these things are being thrown overboard. And that's not because there is a new ideology or there's something that we can all say, well, okay, fine, this is better than that. No, this is literally entropy. And the book, the word actually comes up towards the end of the book. He uses the word entropy in a different context, but I think it's a good way to think about where the American psyche is today. It's really sort of dissolving in entropy. Anything goes. It's a grab for everybody. You can have, presidential candidates, whether it's a senile president going against Trump, who is, let's call it, somewhat questionable character, or you have the new candidate for the Democrats, which is just a puppet for a machine and doesn't really stand for anything other than maybe her own aggrandization or something like that. So it's really a sad story, actually. And what's the saddest part about it is that I think Philip Roth, as good of a writer he is, he's also an incredibly sharp observer. So I would say this is definitely a revelation for me. This is a discovery. I haven't heard about him or read him or anything. And yeah, there's a lot of repetition in this story, and I can see in some of the other books. Yeah, he's probably a sort of a one pony character in a sense, but the one pony is very, very broad and deep, right? The one pony character would be, he's very good at depicting societal psyche in human narratives, but that in itself, of course, is a very rich and deep understanding of human psyche and the psyche of a country, which is very interesting to follow. This is not even on podcast. It's September 13th, 2024. This is Krendelko. For the day, the fund is up 20 basis points. The market's up 0.5%. For the year, we're up 12.5%. The market's up 18%. We're underperforming by 5.5%. I Married a Communist by Philip Roth. I want to talk about three things in the book. First, I want to talk about the way I see the book sort of in a grand scheme, like I spoke about in the prelude. I see Philip Roth as a describer of American psyche and post-war until today. The book was written in 1998, so it's not capturing the last 20 years of American psyche or last 25 years, but still, I think it's a very good description of the American psyche because he predicts really well what is actually happening today. So we have this arch. I start with Ayn Rand and the sort of post or early 20th century psyche of America, which is built on natural law, built on traditional Christian values, and then morphs into ideologies, and the ideology being the ideology, so the ideology for the ideology's sake. And then we have the hard landing, which is the armageddon that we live in, the postmodern armageddon that we live in today. So that will be the first thing I want to talk about, this arch that this book is part of. Then we have I want to talk a little bit about some very specific parts of the narrative, particularly the passage where the main character is described as somebody who looks for an ideology and constantly swaps one for the other until he finally he does live under the umbrella of a communist, but he's never really a communist. He's just looking for an ideology, and then he ends up in sort of a pretty tragic situation, in a romantic tragic situation, and the author describes this as that the real true crime of this person has not been to be an ideologist or a communist or a profiteur by marrying some famous actress or any of that stuff. His real main personal crime, if you will, was that he was believing in some sort of goodness, which obviously doesn't exist, and then life slaps you in the face, and there's some tragic outcomes in this book that kind of underpin that. I think the third thing I'm going to talk about is just like I usually do in book discussions, it's the technique, the literary technique, the novelistic techniques, and I think Philip Roth is for one a very crafted writer. He's very crafty with words, a little bit too much for my taste. So there's a bit of there's a bit of a sense of I don't know what's the word. I'm sure he would have he's very precise with words. He's very precise with words, but to the point where I think he compresses a bit too much information into words. I for my taste, prefer a little bit less compression, less precision, and more simplicity. But I think conceptually, the book is just really amazing. It's a fantastic book conceptually because it's really it sort of draws you into a post-war America and McCarthyism. And then takes you on a journey until you really crash, and you see how misleading not just McCarthyism but any kind of ideology is, and it just leaves you kind of stranded into where the 21st century was going to go, and it's went exactly where I think Roth predicts it's going to go, which is in this postmodern Armageddon that I'm going to talk a little bit about also at the end. So let's start with this arch, this idea of the arch. The arch is just like you have this country, or it's like kind of like almost like a person, right? A person's psyche. You start as an innocent uh, person that believes in like almost like a child. Like a child believes in fairness, a child believes in goodness, in love. These are all things you don't have to train a child, right? Particularly fairness. And then as the child grows, it starts being indoctrinated by ideologies, whatever they may be, nationalism, communism, fascism, wokeism, environmental leftism, yeah, any kind of ism, and then there's the hard landing at some point. So this this arch of a human, actually a nation goes through as much as a human does, which makes all the sense in the world. A nation is just a compilation of humans. So if humans go through this, then that's what a nation also does. And I think it's just a nice idea. It's an idea that I was inspired by while reading the book. So it's not. I don't think Philip Roth specifically talks about this. I have never seen an interview with him or any kind of comments about the book, so I don't know what his actual personal thoughts are. But I would say that he's probably pretty close to my understanding. If I spoke to him, I think he would agree. I'm pretty sure, because it's so well described in the book. It's so well described also in the narrative of the book. Let's talk a little bit about the narrative. The narrative is this life story of particularly one person, Ira Rengold, but there's other characters in the book. But he's this person that kind of grows up and is being accused of being a communist. And the way that works is it's never really clear whether he is or not. It's never clear whether he is an active member of the party or not. Towards the end, it becomes clear that he isn't, that he's just running from one hole into the other, from one mud hole in the other. He starts as a thug, actually, leaves high school, no education, becomes a famous actor, radio actor actually, then marries a famous actress, has a pretty bad relationship with her, has some issues with kids from other marriages and things like that. So there's some of that, but in the end he ends up being betrayed and disappointed and really kind of let down by life. And the story culminates in him understanding that he never actually was an ideologist, that all he was doing is peeling off dirt from his psyche until he ended up finding the ultimate deception, which is his own goodness, which doesn't really exist. So I think that this brings us to the sort of end of this story, which is a bleak, dark end. It's there's another character in the book that just a small episode says that he grew up in Newark, New Jersey, which turned into a pretty bad city with lots of black people taking over the city and crime growing, and the mayor not doing anything about it, and all these kinds of things. And then he wants to stay. He wants to not leave like every other white person leaving, because he believes that he should be there and helping those black people grow into a civic society that the rest of America is sharing. And then in the end, he gets screwed by actually those people he tries to help. They actually kill his wife. So in a mugging. So that's of course what I mean with the hard landing. I think as America we are exactly witnessing that. We're witnessing this true I think beautiful endeavor that almost every civilized liberal democracy is on at some point, which is try to integrate people, try to give people a chance, try to have a balanced society, try not to have a society driven by guns and prisons, and then it just doesn't turn out like that. It seems not to work. For some reason, humans aren't geared towards that kind of societal cooperation. And in the story, there's a hard landing, and it's driven by ideology. It's driven by ideology because what ideology does, it fills a void. It fills the void that is left by people abandoning faith. And what I mean with faith, of course, is not Christian faith or Islamic faith. That's part of it, but it's much more than that. Faith in your own person. You need to have faith in believing that if you do what's right for you, and if you follow your own instincts, that will end up being the right thing to do. You don't have to abide to some artificial ideology. You don't have to believe in climate change just to be a good person, or believe that it's good to discriminate against white people just so somehow you can undo wrongs that were done in the past against non-white people. You don't have to believe that. You can do, if you for some reason feel very comfortable with doing that, so meaning discriminating against one group of people for the benefit of other, then you can do that. But then you're a fascist. And you need to be honest and transparent about what you are. And in this book, this is very clear that there's no honesty, there's no transparency. There's a character in the book, Ephraim, the actress, that is lying to herself constantly and ends up in a very bad place. So I think Philip doesn't really put this out in that way, but I think now, 25 years after the book was written, we can see that his predictions were right. And the reason this is happening is because we're abandoning faith and abandoning the truth. The faith in the truth and the faith in one's own doing rightness. Doing rightness, believing in common sense, doing what your grandfather or grandmother would have recommended you doing, like those kinds of things, the old values. And I want to stay away from Jordan Peterson type preaching of the Bible and things like that. I don't want to be associated with that because I think it's a bit too narrow-minded. But there is definitely some truth there. Like some of the old-fashioned, old-school anecdotes that we all have been, told one way or the other at the kitchen table or in the temples and churches that we go to. Those stories, we can't just throw them overboard. We can't rewrite history. Those are very, very dangerous. They're very, very dangerous things, and we can't do it. But we are unfortunately doing it, and that's what the book predicts. A society that is not entrenched in ideology, but that has disentrenched itself from ideology into a postmodern Armageddon, where anything goes, and there's no truth, and there's no validity of any other argument. And then, of course, selfishness actually takes its own course. So we're back to square one, where we were trying to overcome the sort of early pioneer spirit of America, which was built on take care of your own, drive your own self-interest, and do it in the context of faith and the law and order and things like that, and then you can have a country that actually functions. And we went through half a century or even more of ideology, and we ended up without any kind of ideology left, because we obviously understood that the ideologies that we believed in, whether it was fascism or communism or now wokeism, that they don't work. And then we are in this perverse situation now where the people that were supposed to actually help the poor, for example, the Democrats, and the people that supposedly are there to help Black Americans or immigrants or people like of those sorts, help them, they are actually hurting them the most. Whether it's if you have illegal immigration, you hurt the poor the most. If you have because you're just letting the tragedy of the commons takes its course, and the tragedy of the commons is hurting the weakest the most. If you have capital, you can just buy gold or Bitcoin or even the S&P 500 and ride this wave of inflation and capital illusion. But if you don't, you're going to get screwed. Then you have other policies. But even DEI universities, it's hurting those. A Black person that is actually capable of going to Stanford is being hurt most. by DI. So there's all of these things that are really getting in some sort of perversion, turning everything upside down. And then the right wing, the people that supposedly are the bigots and the fascists, they actually have the most interest in preserving the future for our kids and making lives better for us. And yes, of course, they do exclude, let's say, illegal immigrants or other kinds of people, but they exclude them because that is to protect from the tragedy of the commons. They're not, Ronald Reagan was famously for immigration, but it's of course immigration under the control of making sure that the commons are preserved, and not just so you can gain votes, for example. So that's the way I see the book. I mean, again, I think if I had to summarize it in one sentence, it is the arch of going from a faith-based, natural psyche towards an ideology-based psyche, and then losing the illusion of the ideology, and then ending up in a postmodern Armageddon. Lastly, I want to talk a little bit about the techniques and the literary techniques. I think Philip is a fantastic observer, very keen, sharp observer, and he's very good with psychological analysis. I guess psyche is his strength. I think where he lets me down is a bit with his use of language. He's too narrow. It's too narrow is the wrong word. He uses too many specific words, right? There's words that I've never heard of. So, I joke, like, kind of SAT type words that most people don't understand. They are very precise words. They capture a very specific meaning, pernicious, redemption, I don't know, all kinds of words. For me, as a second language English person, those are tough words. I would say for most people in America, they're tough words. Now, of course, that doesn't mean it's a bad thing. I think literature, art has the right. This is like in music. You can have Jimmy Page doing a very sophisticated solo, or you can have the Ramones doing the three chords. Both work, and both were considered rock music, and both were very successful. It's just for my taste. I think it's a bit too much, and it gets a little bit too. Too over your head. I think it's just a little bit more simplicity, and clarity would probably serve the book better. What I really like is though how he embeds this psyche of a whole nation into the narrative of just a couple of people, and really there's another thing that sort of rubs me a bit off the wrong way, but that's okay. I mean, Philip being Jewish, he's also writing about sort of the Jewishness of people and how they're either are ashamed of being Jewish or try to disguise it, which was probably part of sort of the post-war psyche of Jewish people in America. To me, that's not very interesting because it kind of leads towards this identity politics. You're not a woman, you're not a Jew, you're not white, you're not black, you're a human. First and foremost, a human. Let's try to establish that as a baseline. I think it's a much better a recipe for success in the country as a whole. But again, that's of course, I understand where he's coming from and his background. But again, I think as an intellectual and an artist, I think Philip Roth is definitely up there, and I highly recommend the book. Thank you.